Today's episode features Julian Woods, microtonal jazz guitarist slash bassist, arranger, and composer. He works with just intonation and or quarter tones, both in the studio as well as in a live setting. His recent jazz collaborations involve Philipp Gerschlauer and Diego Pinera. In this episode, we discuss some of his new compositions and approaches to playing microtonal music. I'm not completely sure of your background. Are you a PhD student is maybe what you said, or...?
No, so I just finished doing a master's course, actually, so my background's a bit of a strange one. I did my undergraduate course in chemistry at Oxford. I finished in 2019. And then I kind of had a few years figuring my stuff out and, exploring lots of different kinds of music. And I ended up doing a performance course, a jazz performance course at a music college called Guildhall School of Music in London. Mm-hmm. And I've just finished that. Well, I finished in July. I just graduated in November. So I always knew since I was maybe a young teen that I wanted to be a musician, but I kind of ended up going down this route of doing a science degree. And in a roundabout way, I think that partly contributed to me ending up getting into tuning theory, because it does help having that kind of mathematical background to get your head around some of this stuff.
And I even think that the field of music theory lately has taken turns into various areas that include either, delvings into history and various social sciences, or analyses that turn to higher forms of mathematics, discovering how sets and groups and things like that work.
There's all symmetry, and so set theory or group theory is something that I studied at university in my chemistry course in a way entirely unrelated to music. But, of course, people like Alan Forte have applied pretty similar maths to music. And certainly if you're thinking about learning about how that math applies to music, then Alan Forte's book, The Structure of Atonal Music, is a great one. I've only read a tiny fraction of it, and I've only scratched the surface of what that type of approach is capable of. Tuning lattices and chemical lattices might have more overlaps than I'd considered. I wouldn't say these days that I am into chemistry. I kind of left that stage of my life behind and moved forward with being a musician and a composer. And it's only quite accidentally that it's ended up being helpful.
How fascinating. So really you've, has it sort of been, I know you said you've always wanted to be a musician, but was there some kind of a moment where you realized that was really what you wanted to do? And what other kinds of questions were you asking yourself as you pivoted?
Well, it's funny because if you'd asked me when I was 13, what do I want to be, I would have told you probably that I want to be a blues guitarist or a rock and roll guitarist. At that kind of age, I was really into Chuck Berry and Peter Green, Stevie Ray Vaughan, that type of thing. And it was maybe in my late teens that I got into jazz. And leaving school, my feeling then was that I wanted to be a musician of some sort, probably a jazz musician. I ended up doing a chemistry course because it seemed like a good idea at the time, I suppose. But even then, when I was at university, I spent a lot of my time playing music. I think it was at that point in time that I started to really explore my musical identity, I suppose, and try to figure out really who I was and what I wanted to do, because I think it was about the time I started university that I started hearing like contemporary jazz, and that kind of blew my mind. The Pat Metheny album, The Way Up, is one of the records that kind of pivoted me away from kind of straight ahead jazz and made me want to explore contemporary music more. That record is kind of jazz, but also it's got elements of minimalism and other kind of contemporary composition. And that kind of expanded my horizons a lot. And then I got kind of really blindsided when I heard some music by Amir El Safar, the trumpeter. So he's an American guy whose family is Iraqi, and he very much started his musical life as a jazz musician, a jazz trumpeter. And then kind of a little bit later on in his life, he traveled to Iraq and spent a lot of time learning Persian traditional music. And when he got back to the States, everyone was saying to him, man, you've got to put these things together, make some Persian jazz. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that. But eventually he caved, and he did. And I'm glad, because his record, Not 2, That blew my mind, and I think that was one of the things that made me interested in microtonal music. In that record, you hear some Persian scales, and those intervals. I'd never heard intervals like that, and I thought, well, why can't I play those intervals? Why am I confined to these intervals I've got on the guitar or on the bass? I want a bit of that, particularly the neutral second. That obviously comes up a lot in a lot of Persian and Arabic traditional music. And I thought, wow, that's such a beautiful interval. And I think that one record did probably the most to contribute to me suddenly having this epiphany that there is music outside of 12 divisions of the octave. And then I kind of went on a bit of a hunt. I kind of listened voraciously to every type of microtonal music I could find. I'm talking about kind of classical guys like Habar. Who else was I checking out? Charles Ives, of course, and
yes,
Wisnigradsky, all that kind of. So I was just furiously googling about microtonal music, not just Western stuff, but Arabic stuff too. I've been listening to a lot of Kulthum, the great Egyptian singer, and that was a bit of a period of exploration for me. But it really wasn't until a couple of years later that I studied it properly and began to understand the math of how it all works. And that was when I studied with Philipp Gerschlauer, the great microtonal saxophonist. It was with him that I began to actually understand how, particularly, how just intonation works. Beginning to understand the math of the dual and the harmonic series and all that. And that, a lot of things clicked into place then. And that's when I was like, okay, this is now what I want to be. I want, these sounds to be a part of my musical identity. I've got to figure out a way of playing these on the instruments that I know how to play. So that's when I started sticking extra frets on my guitars, and I started sticking extra labels on my fretless bass and all that kind of stuff, trying to figure out how I could make these sounds I wanted to hear and I wanted to write with.
Yes, in your videos I've seen there's a variety of ensembles. It very much reminds me of my own work, actually, because I have just gotten a fretless bass and am very excited to use it. And I see that you had stickers on yours in one of your videos. Did that interfere with the playing action at all? Like, did you find the stickers were falling off, or that it was relatively unobtrusive?
At first, it was fine, actually. So what I did in I think the video you're thinking of is I had a huge variety of, I think, about 35 pitches to the octave, because I'd written this arrangement of Angel Eyes and Just Intonation, which needed a lot of notes, and it sounded okay at first, and then the tape starts to peel off, and then it starts getting in the way a bit. And so I decided later on that what's better to do for me is basically to mark out the tempered pitches and use those as a reference, and use a combination of my ear and my eye to find the pure pitches. And when we played Angel Eyes live in that video that you might have seen, that's exactly how it was. I just had the tempered pitches as a reference, and I was listening to Philip, and Philip was listening to me, and I think it worked out okay. And it meant I was able to produce a nice sound, because ultimately sound is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, when you're playing an instrument. And so with the stickers on and stuff, it did definitely have an impact on the sound. And I wasn't satisfied with that approach.
I have experienced this in playing myself, where if you're too focused on getting the pitches perfect, it influences your sound, and it almost makes you a little bit, it sound more like a beginner, perhaps, because you're trying to get these things, and you're spending so much mental energy toward that you don't, you might not be as expressive as you normally would be if you were in a familiar system.
That's exactly right, yeah. I mean, for me, the most important thing is the music, right? What happens on the stage is much more important than what's written on the page. And so there are plenty of instances in that video of Angel Eyes where we're maybe not quite playing the right pitches, but the performance has a nice vibe, and the sound is good, so it doesn't really matter. It's interesting because there were 2 nights on which we played that arrangement live, and I think the second night was probably the more accurate on the whole. But even the first night, where pitch-wise there were plenty of inaccuracies, the performance still sounded really nice. It had a good vibe. We were grooving and doing lots of improvising, and there was a great energy. So, again, the pitches are almost the least important thing in a way. They're just the framework that we start with.
Yeah, I agree. It's so funny because there's a lot of elasticity, I think, in where the pitches can go and what roles are allowed. Lately, in my exploration of what makes something maybe sound more Zen harmonic than standard 12-tone equal tempered music, I'm trying to explore just how far you can change pitches or like levels of inaccuracy you can get that are quite big, such that like you can play a chord progression in a strange tuning, and even though a lot of the pitches are far from where they are in 12-tone equal temperament, the roles still work out. And it also makes me interested in the idea of covering a song and how you might translate it to a microtonal tuning, because I know some people have different attitudes about this. It makes me wonder how you might translate one song in 12-tone equal temperament to another tuning system and what that tuning system might be, especially considering some of the tuning systems I've seen you use. So we have just intonation, we have quarter tones, and we have Philipp's tuning as well. I know he has fingerings for 128 note tuning, but I assume that potentially he thinks in JI. Is that sort of how that goes?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Philipp's book, but
yes,
basically, it's just a list of fingerings with cent deviations, and so when I write music for Philipp, usually I write it with cent deviations, and then for the most important notes, I'll also write a ratio, so it's clear. But I think he's pretty good at memorizing. Okay, well, this pitch is this number of cents, and I've got a fingering here that's this number of cents away. That's close enough. Let's use that.
Yeah,
it's quite a pragmatic, practical approach. But I mean, for me, the thing that I find most attractive about microtonality, or at least one of the things, is commas. I like the contrast of having two different versions of the same note, or multiple different versions of the same note. So if I'm translating a tempered melody into a different tuning, what I'm kind of looking for is what different versions of that interval can I use? Could I use, for example, the 5 limit minor sixth, and also use the 7 limit minor sixth to create contrast, or could I use 6/5 and 7/6? Two different minor thirds. I think that for me, that gives the quality of like a vocalist. For me, like something I found very inspiring when I was working on the Angel Eyes arrangement was listening to Frank Sinatra, because where he sings the interval at one point in the harmony is not the same as where he sings it in another point in the harmony.
I've been trying to think, my poor old heart, it ain't.
He's just articulating the melody in a certain way, and it's the same thing with a lot of singers. And Chet Baker comes to mind as well. Very different style to Sinatra, much more kind of conversational, but nonetheless, the same quality is heard, where often the singer is quite a long way from the tempered pitches, and they're sharpening or flattening pitches for expressive reasons. And that's one of the things I find most attractive about working with pitch, is you have different shades of the same notes. And I think Ben Johnston was quite interested in the same thing. He was saying, I want to have lots of different shades of C sharp or whatever.
I think I see those commas in your style in Angel Eyes when Philipp maybe plays two notes that are a microtone apart, and he's so excellent at sort of changing his vowel or changing the fingering or doing something with the articulation where he has the power to either play two notes a microtone apart and you hear them as sliding, or he plays two notes a microtone apart and you hear them as distinct notes. And sometimes that's very much carried in the articulation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in that particular arrangement, the thing that the main feature of that arrangement, I guess, in my head, is the contrast between 6/5 and 7/6. So that came about just because I was playing around with different ways I could tune the chords of that song. You know, I was listening in particular to the Frank Sinatra version of Angel Eyes, which is arranged by Nelson Riddle, and he's got this beautiful descending bass line. And I thought, okay, well, how can I make it so that on the first time that E flat comes up, it's either 7/6 or 6/5, and then the other time it comes up in the melody a bar later, it's the opposite one, and just toying around with different ways to create that comma. And 36-35 is the gap between 7/6 and 6/5. It's pretty much exactly a tempered quarter tone. I think it's like 46 cents or something like that. So it's quite a dramatic contrast.
Oh yeah, because the 6/5, 6/5 is sharp, and 7/6 is flat.
Right.
And they're both not quite on, so it makes sense that they would widen to that distance. That's funny. I forgot that 36/35 was that wide. I thought it was smaller.
Yeah. No, it's a pure quarter tone, and it's the 7 limit quarter tone, and yeah, to me it's quite dramatic in a way because, okay, it's only 46 cents, but 46 cents is a lot when you're talking about the same pitch class. You know, we're still talking about a minor third, right? So to move a minor third as far as that and it still be recognizable as a minor third is kind of amazing. But it's very context dependent because 7/6, in certain contexts, might sound closer to being some kind of like augmented second because it is so flat. But I don't know, in the right context, to me, it's a really beautiful, powerful minor third that feels very emotive. It's got a real strain to it. It's the sound of the blues to me. You know, 6/5 by contrast is very hopeful. You know, it's a very pure kind of sad sound. Whereas 7/6 is a real kind of painful kind of sadness, like a real agony.
Yeah, it's got kind of like a bite to it, definitely. And I super agree also about the contextual nature of everything, how you stack the intervals up. Would you say when you're using commas in JI arrangements that you are trying to capture any of the inflection of how someone might sing it in 12-tone equal temperament with small deviations? Or are you going for a different approach fundamentally? Or maybe you're trying to blend them?
Yeah, I think I'm interested in that, absolutely. I'm interested in the way that pitches are articulated by singers and by other kind of free pitch instruments. And one of the pieces that I think you've heard is Every Swing Has a Silver Roundabout. And it's a similar deal there where... yeah. That's a tune of mine, and it's a similar deal where I wrote that. You may not be able to hear it because it's quite a fast melody, but at least in my head when I was conceiving it, there are multiple different variations of the same notes. I think it might well be that there's I think it's a similar deal where there's a 7/6 and there's also a 6/5 the following bar, so that we get this sense of movement when it's perceived as being essentially the same note.
Your composition, more than the other videos I watched, definitely carries that sense of like having microtonal steps be present in the melodic language of what's going on, and not being hidden within inner voices or existing at one point and then quite a bit later existing again as different intonations, which is a more sly way to do it.
Yeah. No, I hear what you mean about the difference between kind of horizontal microtonality and vertical microtonality. I think in that particular one, it's a funny one because we recorded it as a trio, bass, drums, and sax. And when I was working on editing that recording, I showed it to a couple of my friends, and one of them said, "You know, it sounds to me like it's not microtonal." It's
Whoa!
No, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. Well, you know, I took it to mean that means the use of microtonality is fairly well blended into the piece. So I took it as a compliment. Maybe I shouldn't have done, but I chose to. And you know, later on in the piece, we go into this kind of swing blues section. And the chords move by 3/4 tones at one point. So we do have this movement that's microtonal, but at any one moment in time, the chords are tempered chords. So in that section, the microtonality is only referential, right? It's only horizontal microtonality.
Yes. Very important distinction.
Yeah, whereas earlier on they're a bit vertical. But because of all the things that are going on, I mean, Diego is, doing some pretty detailed work on the drums, and Philipp's taking a pretty crazy, like, free solo. So I think you're not supposed to pick out the individual pitches and hear those. That it's more supposed to be a certain texture. And more and more, when I'm writing music and writing microtonal music, I'm trying to write something that uses texture as the main parameter to manipulate. I kind of got this a bit from Ligeti. I had a huge Ligeti phase last year, kind of last spring, summer, and I like the fact that when he's writing microtonal music, often the actual specific pitches are not really the point. The point is that he's using it to create a blurry effect. Right, he wants to create this sense where you can't really hear any one particular individual note or any particular melody. You just hear this kind of cloudy blur. I love that approach to microtonality. I think it's a really abstract way. It's just, a way of blurring the boundaries. And, he was blurring the boundaries of tempo, of pulse, of meter, and also of pitch. And so in aggregate, I'm thinking, for example, if you listen to his chamber concerto for 13 instruments, that is in equal temperament, and yet it's so blurry, and there's so much going on, and these kind of interlocking parts that even though it's a tempered piece, a lot of the time you really struggle to pick out any individual pitches. I love that effect.
Me too. Yeah, when you can't tell really what's going on, but you know that there's something coherent, and there's so many different ways to do that, and there's so many different levels of specificity. Exploring contexts where either you don't really have to know what the pitches are to get the effect, but you could, if you wanted to, or vice versa. Very interesting stuff. Manipulating the texture. Every swing has a silver roundabout. I'd be really curious also to know what the process was. You said Philipp took a solo, so I'm wondering, of course, what the level of improvisational element was in this piece, and what you gave out, and all of that kind of thing, and how the music was written.
Yeah, so I wrote about 2 or 3 pages of music that I put in front of Philipp and Diego and I. It's we've got that opening, which is quite free, and I basically just tell them to improvise it at the very beginning, and then Diego brings in the time, and then we get to the tune. Right? That's kind of our written section, but even then, Philipp plays with a kind of sense of abandon. He's not so worried about exactly what's written down the page. He loves to improvise. So even when he's playing that written melody, his improvisational spirit really comes through. He's all about, just playing what he feels in the moment, which I think is really cool. But the main kind of formally improvised section is when we get to that blues, and then everything Philipp does there, that's his improvisation. And I wasn't sure, writing this piece, I was thinking maybe what's going to happen is we go into that blues and we play it kind of quite straight. We don't necessarily play it all that free. I was kind of thinking in my head, like, maybe this section is going to sound like Cedar Walton or something. But I didn't want to tell Philipp how to improvise, and what he came out with is the incredible thing you'll hear in that recording. He's not really playing the chord changes at all. He's playing a bit more like Ornette Coleman might play, right? The chord changes are one thing, and what he's doing is almost completely unrelated to that. He could have chosen to take the individual pitches in those chords, which are mostly just dominant seventh chords. It's just they're moving by quarter tones or 3/4 tones, that type of thing. And he could have just chosen to play, right, we're on E flat 7 now, I'm going to play those chord tones, and now we're on, D quarter sharp 7, now I'm going to play those chord tones. But, instead he takes a much looser, more textural, much freer approach. And so he's playing a ton of pitches there, and I have no clue what half those pitches are, and they're not necessarily ones that are in the chords. They're just, that's just his thing. That's his personality coming out there, his personal language that he's superimposing on the musical context that I've kind of provided there. So the blues section it starts at 1 minute 41. And at that point, I'm playing a walking bass line over the chord changes I've written, and I'm playing pretty strictly to the chord changes that have been written. I'm improvising, of course, around that, but I'm pretty much playing it pretty straight. Diego's swinging away on the ride cymbal, having a good time, and Philipp is just doing his thing, really letting it loose. And the feeling in the moment, it was a pretty intense recording session. It was very, very hot. It was in Berlin in June or July, the hottest time of year. We were pretty short in time. We had a very limited amount of time to record this music, and we'd done a couple of takes, and it hadn't gone that great. And I think at that point we were playing it now much faster than we had planned to play it. So there's a lot of energy in the room, and Philipp needed to leave soon to go pick up his kids, and so there was a kind of a stress and tension in that moment. And I feel like in that moment he was just letting loose and releasing all that stress and tension into his horn, and I think that's what you hear there. It's very personal. It's very, I guess it's very cathartic, and it's very instinctive. I don't think he's thinking about what pitches he's playing or what intervals he's playing, what the chord changes are. He's just letting loose.
He's using a huge chromatic variety, but then he's landing on notes that are in the chords, but they're often like a high chord tone, like a ninth or something. In general, but maybe not as high as an 11th or a 13th when he's like holding a long note over him. So you're saying I think I get it now. So the chords, you're going in between E flat 7 and then like D half flat 7?
Something like that. I think so. The first two chords of the progression are tempered. I think in the key we played it in, it was A7 going down to F7, right?
Oh, so, yeah.
And then went back to A7, back to F7. And then in the third line of blues, where you usually do a 2-5-1 or a 5-4-1, instead we kind of do a 5-4, but it's not of A major. It's like a 5-4 of I think it's G half sharp major, right? So in other words, we've still got these dominant chords that are descending in tones, but they're in a different place on the grid, right? They're descending in tones, but they're on the quarter tone grid rather than the semitone grid.
Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. It's very interesting. So I'd see also in your comment that you have, like, the fundamental is A, and it uses some JI pitches, 17 over 16, 12 over 11, 7 over 6, 4 over 3, 3 over 2, 18 over 11, 16 over 9, 11 over 6, plus a couple of other bits and bobs. How many, maybe about how many different pitch classes total were you visualizing using?
Well, it's funny because I guess this is just reflective of how I think when I write. When I'm thinking about writing a melody, I'm thinking about what ratio it would be ideally, right? In practice, of course, often it ends up being something slightly different. Maybe it becomes a tempered pitch or it gets rounded up or whatever. But when I was writing that melody, I was just thinking about the ratios, and actually not just thinking about the ratios, but at that point I'd been checking out a lot of Arabic music and studying the Arabic tetrachords, otherwise known as the ajnas. And so I was also thinking about those as I was writing that tune. And so I never really thought about how many different notes I was using. In other words, I guess what I'm saying in a roundabout way is I didn't start off with a certain GIS scale and say, right, let's write a piece in this GIS scale. What notes I chose to use unfurled as I wrote the melody.
Would it be fair to say that you think of things in sort of maybe a 24-tone equal tempered way and tune according to JI based on whatever's closest, or do you perhaps have other guiding thinking? Or are you following changes that you come up with yourself that are from something else?
I think it's quite an oral approach, really. Often if I'm writing a microtonal melody, often I'll use a fretless instrument, so I can kind of play around it and feel what I want the pitch to be. And sometimes it'll be a known ratio. It might be like, I know what 5/4 sounds like, and I can find that in my instrument. Or it might be that I just find the pitch I'm looking for. Then I have to go onto Zen Wiki or whatever and find out what ratio is it that I'm actually playing there.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, yeah. It's ultimately about, as you know, I like playing live music. So for me, it's all about this how that feels when I'm playing it. How it feels to hold the instrument in my hands and make that sound.
Absolutely. So is your setup then that you've got a fretless bass, and then you also have a fretless guitar, and then you just use that to explore what you may?
So at the moment, the main things I'm doing is I'm using fretless electric bass, a double bass as well, which of course is also fretless. And guitar-wise, lately I've been playing a lot of my quarter-tone guitar, and that's the microtonal instrument I've had for the longest, and I've used in the kind of biggest variety of contexts. And a lot of the time when I'm playing that instrument, I'm using it for textural effect rather than to play specific pitches. There's certain instances where I've used it to play specific pitches, and one of those instances is, of course, Every String Has a Silver Roundabout, and there are some others. But often I'm using it in a kind of free improvisation context. And then other guitars that I've got a 19-tone guitar. I'm not so good with that one. I haven't played it as much, but I've toyed around with it. But the main thing I do guitar-wise is I have a normal guitar that I stick extra frets on. So I've got some little plastic rods. I think it's called Plastruct. They're just like semi-round rods. I think they're used for making model aeroplanes or something like that. But it happens that they work great as little added frets, and I just use double-sided sticky tape, stick them on the guitar, sand them down to the right height, and then I can stick them anywhere and take them on and off as I need to. That's, for me, a great approach because I'm not playing in any kind of fixed tunings. One piece might need a different tuning to another piece, and one gig might need some different pitches to another gig. I've used it to play Arabic music. I've used it to map out the pitches of maqam, for example. But also I've used it to do JI stuff. I've stuck 11/8s in there and 7/6s and all kinds of stuff. So it's very context dependent, and it's a great flexible approach that's almost as good as having an adjustable fret guitar. I am working on getting an adjustable fret guitar. I've got the fretboard. I just need all the rest of the instrument next.
Yes, the next step. That does seem conducive to the way I think us microtonalists might often do things. Like, it's very project to project, and we're using different pitches from one to the next. So to have like an entire fretboard where there's lots of microtonal notes and it's significantly harder to play, but you might only be using a few of them for your latest project, it might not be as good of an investment as you mentioned, taking the fretlets and putting them in different places for whatever individual project you have and then moving them around. Although, of course, it's different for whoever is trying it out.
Yeah, well, you brought up a good point there, which is that one thing you don't want is to have 100 different pitches, but you only need 4 of them. Right.
Right.
So I got into this situation quite recently. I was playing a piece of contemporary music, and the composer knew that I play quarter-tone guitar, so she asked me to bring my quarter-tone guitar. But as we began working on the piece, it became clear there were only about 4 or 5 pitches that were not tempered pitches, and they were all pure pitches. And so with the quarter-tone guitar, one issue, of course, is that the pitches are not pure, they're tempered pitches. So in order to get a 7/4, I was having to bend a little bit the quarter tone. But more to the point, the biggest issue is that there are just so many frets in the way. And actually, if most of the stuff I'm playing is tempered, then it's only really inconvenient and impractical to have hundreds and hundreds of different frets that I don't need. And so in that instance, I said to the composer, well, how about I just bring my normal guitar and I'll stick some notes on of these ratios you want me to play. And that was a much more practical approach. And of course, it also means that I can get those fretless exactly where I want them to be tuning-wise.
I was just talking about this with someone earlier today, how lots of notes that you play, if you're not playing very agile, you can pre-bend a lot of them. And so, like, before I had a fretless bass, for my YouTube covers, when I need bass notes, I just pre-bend them because I'm playing relatively easy bass notes and not, like, crazy licks or anything. So it's the thought that I'm having now is that something that was like an equal tempered guitar, like a quarter tone guitar that's all the way fretted with 24 frets per octave and everything, can be quite an exploratory item as well. Like, it might be more suited to just sitting down and saying, like, what can I do with this universe and how can I just find things physically? Because then when you have the small fretlets, you're using it for a specific purpose, but if you wanted to like modulate in a very specific way that's dictated by the math, you might have to like stick on some more or do something
No, you're
crazy like
absolutely
that.
right. I think the
Compositional
quarter-tone
tools.
guitar. I think the quarter-tone guitar is a great exploratory tool, and that really is what it was for me, because it was my first instrument that I could play microtonally on with fixed pitches as against fretless, and it was through that I got a feel for what an 11/8 sounds like, what a 13/8 sounds like, and as you say, you can get intervals like 7/4 with a bit of bending, or at least approximate them quite well enough to get a feel for what they sound like, and so yeah. It was through playing around with that instrument and just toying around, improvising, that I got a feel for what harmonic ratios I like to hear. I've used that instrument to play sub minor chords, with sub minor thirds and sub minor sevenths, and neutral seconds. It does great neutral second with the quarter tone. Yeah, it's a really good place to start, and for me, these days, as I say, I don't use it very much for playing that specific pitch music, because rarely do I need all those notes. But as an exploratory tool, it's super helpful to kind of just get to learn new sounds.
In your experience playing microtonal guitar, do you find that there's a certain area where if you get too high on the guitar and put fretlets up high, like for maybe smaller commas or things, that it starts to become impractical? Like, let's say, would it be really hard to play a quarter tone like past the octave, or what are sort of the limits of that area, you would say, in terms of pitch?
That's a good question. I very much tested that out on this bit of contemporary music I was doing recently, because the composer wanted some quarter tones very high up, and I did warn her, maybe this is not going to work, but actually it kind of did work out okay, surprisingly. It does get harder, and you have to play with your fingernails, right? You can't put your whole finger on the fret. You've got to kind of just tuck your fingernail in. And it's hard to get a good sound. That was the main thing that I was worried about. But with a bit of practice, it came out okay. The main thing that's an issue is my instinct is to press quite hard. Maybe I just have too much tension in my body when I play. But if you do that and you press really hard on these frets that are very close together, then it tends to buzz or it goes out of tune. So the main challenge for me is my own technique. Maybe it comes from my own musical background or whatever it may be, but if you're using frets that are very close together, you do have to be quite gentle and quite sensitive. So I would say that I'm personally happy to put frets way up to the very top of the fretboard. I've got a 22 fret guitar. I wouldn't object to putting a fret in between the 21st fret and the 22nd fret, but it does depend on how fast I need to reach that note, and maybe what dynamic it needs to be played in and all that kind of things, and how many other frets there are close to it. If it's just that one quarter tone, there aren't any other ones nearby for me to stumble over, maybe it's okay. Whereas if I've got 10 other frets nearby, then that's maybe more of an issue. And that's also a limitation of the fretlet approach, because those fretlets, you can do your hardest to make the level of the frets match level of the fretlet match the level of the real fret, so you don't get buzz. But ultimately, it's a pretty crude process. I'm sticking it on with double-sided sticky tape, and I'm using sandpaper to get it to the right height. It's never going to be quite the right height. And
right.
Of course, as you play it more, it wears down. It ceases to become the right height. So I think ultimately the issue is about what sound is a good enough sound for you to be satisfied with. And that's, of course, going to be very context-dependent. But for me, it's really important that I try my best to play with a nice sound. And that's one thing that being at music college in the last couple of years has made me appreciate, is quite how important the tone you produce is, and how it in many ways is more important than the exact notes or almost anything else.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to circle back around to Angel Eyes and maybe a few other performances. What would you say are the main differences between, like, from a harmonic or melodic or microtonal perspective, what are the main differences between Angel Eyes, your version of Angel Eyes, and some of the other standards that are out there? I remembered, I think that there was a Billie Holiday version that I had listened to a while ago. I didn't listen to the Frank Sinatra version, though.
So you mean what's the main difference between my version and the kind of jazz versions of that tune?
Yeah, just like the standard chart. Like if you had to describe some of the differences. Getting as specific and as nerdy as you would like, since this is now in Zen, we are allowed.
So, I mean, the main difference, I suppose, is that I think the version I wrote had about 40 notes per octave. But I think more, in terms of how it makes you feel to listen to it, I think the main difference is that the modulation in the bridge lands in a different place. So, if we speak about this piece being in G minor for a moment, then usually the modulation in the bridge would go to E flat major. But I thought, hang on, maybe it would be cool, instead of landing on E flat, how about we land on 13/8, right? So halfway in between E flat and E natural, right? So that key change coming into the bridge basically lands us about a quarter tone sharper than you'd expect that key change to land us. So the effect of the bridge, at least to my ear, the effect of the bridge is kind of different because when you go to E flat, I guess it's about the release of tension. I feel like maybe coming to the 13/8 instead of coming all the way down to E flat is maybe a bit more tense. It doesn't release quite as much tension. But I guess the other thing is that overall, we're talking about using different shades of the same note. And where that leads us is that in the A section, we have a lot of different shades of a couple of different shades of the sharp 11, a couple of different shades of the minor third, even two different shades of the root G. We've I think I might have to get the chart up and tell you exactly what the details are, but we have.
Oh, sure.
So I'm talking about G here as being the fundamental. We actually have a G that's about G minus 49 cents. If we're in G minor, then chord 5 of chord 5 is an A7 chord, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now I decided, okay, I want that A in a certain place. I think I decided it was a 10/9. And, okay, I want the third of that chord to be pure. I want the fifth of that chord to be pure. I want the seventh of that chord to be pure. And it turns out that if you do a 7/4 on top of a 10/9, what we get is a G that is about almost a quarter tone flat of our fundamental. So, in other words, what we're looking at there is that G is a 7/4 multiplied by a 10/9.
Yeah. I see. Okay. That makes sense. And then I also heard you were talking about how the bridge section modulated and you had a 13/8. I want to say that I also hear like a standard minor sixth in the bass line at a different point. Like when you're bouncing through different fourths to imitate like the 2-5-1 of various short sections. Or something. Are you using two different sixths there, like 13/8 and then also maybe 8/5 or something?
Yeah, so I think we've done this tune in a couple of different iterations, and certainly I think the one that I put up does in fact land on 8/5. Let me just double check that.
Yes, perfect. And I'll do some multiplying while you do that. Oh, it's 35/18.
Right, that's it. 35/18, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing about with this, because it was so complicated, I had to write out a whole list of all the different pitches. So I produced this sheet that's got a complete list of all the different pitches and all the different chords. And then later on I simplified it a bit for live performance.
Do you find notation helpful in this process? I saw that you had notation in your excellent presentation that you gave a while ago, but I didn't know if you were using Dorico or Sibelius or something else, or what you think of that.
Yeah, I use Sibelius, and the notation is very much just a way of communicating it to the people I'm playing it with. You know, the actual composing process didn't happen with conventional notation at all. The composing process happened with, you know, a pen and paper and some math, you know, a calculator, right?
Yeah.
And then I later used Reaper to kind of hear it. I'm just getting up the sheet now. So, I mean, how I thought about it is having two separate tunings, a tuning in the A section and a tuning in the bridge. And the fundamental of the tuning in the A section is our G, and the fundamental of the tuning in the bridge is the 13/8 of G, right?
Yeah.
That was how I conceived it in my head. And so in the A section, we've got 19 different pitches, and we've got 18 in the bridge. And again, when we performed it live, I simplified it, so it wasn't quite so much it wasn't quite so complicated. But at least in my head, this is how it started out. And for example, if we look at the chart that I'm looking at right now, we've got two different major seconds, right? We've got a 10-9 and a 9-8.
By the way, Julian, I'd hate to interrupt. Is it possible to share that chart
Yes,
with the
of course it
screen?
is.
Because then anyone who's watching the podcast episode on YouTube will be able to see it. I noticed in the opening section, you have the G that's being held at the bottom, and then like a really microtonal, like dee, 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 like where you have like the sixth, and then like maybe a microtonally higher sixth going down, and it almost sounds a little bit sixth, seventh-y, like it would be G Dorian, which was so shocking to me because I was like, that's definitely a microtone. Why would it sound like that to me? So maybe it's a high sixth. You'll have to tell us more about it.
Well, let's have a look. So, I mean, as I say, we've got two different A naturals here, two different B flats, just the one B natural. We've got two different C naturals, two different C sharps, just one D, two different E flats, just one E natural, just one F sharp, and here's our lower G, our 3518, as you correctly identified. So these are the pitches I started out with for the A section. And these are all just based on what chords and how I wanted to tune each chord. So this is not supposed to look like that, as you probably imagined. Let's see if I can tell that up.
Sibelius moment.
Yeah, exactly. So here we go. What you can see here is for the A7 chord, I wanted to start on the A minus 18, the 10-9. And so,
sorry, I've just found the A7 chord. It's the last one that you're referring to, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah, right. So this is our A7 chord. And so in order to get a pure third with that A minus 18, or rather 10-9, that gives us a C sharp minor 31, right, which is this one here, 2518.
I see.
We also have a C sharp in another chord in this tune. We also have a C sharp. I'm just going to see if I can find where that is in this messy chart. Well, let's think about the melody. Ba, 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 ba. So that sharp 11 there, ba, that's our 2518. Ba, 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 da, da, da. Ba, 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 da, 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 da. So the other one must be the flat seventh of E flat 7, right? Because in the chord progression, that's how it goes. It's like G minor, A7, A flat 7, G minor.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can.
And then the E flat 7 that would have 7/5 in it. The E flat is 6/5.
Let me just check.
Right.
That. And another thing I can do, actually, I can play it for you in Reaper, perhaps.
Hey, yeah, sure, that would be amazing.
Because then you can really hear the commas. And, I wasn't necessarily expecting that we'd be able to play all that live because it's very complicated, lots of notes, but it was, as I say, it was a bit of an exploration for me.
Would you say that there are certain commas that are more important to distinguish in a live performance than others? Like, if you're hoping for, like, a certain rate on those? Like, I definitely know that when I do these kinds of things, there's, like, I make something where I'm like, okay, these two notes definitely have to sound different with this context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of them...
mean, the most important one, apart from the 7/6/6/5 we talked about, the most important one is there's an E natural that comes up later on, which I'll show you, where it's, again, quite a dramatic gap. This piece could be done really well by doing one high number equal temperament in the A section and another one in the bridge, because at those two tunings, that's each tuning internally is only 7 limits.
Yeah.
So it's kind of simple. So the only boundary is this transition between the A section and the bridge, where we jump by a 13/8. So I think, in absence of that, if one were to record the A section and the bridge separately, then you only need a 7 limit tuning.
Ah, I see what you're saying. It's like the 13/8 relationship is kind of a modulatory relationship, but
That's exactly what it is.
But the relationships between all of the notes within their self-contained systems at each section are just 7 limit.
That's exactly right, yeah. Let's see if we
cool.
can hear it, shall we? Let's see what happens if I play this.
That's 6/5, right? That's the one. Wow! Do you know what struck me so much about that when you played that? The way you were using 6/5 made it sound so high. I didn't exactly think it was a major third, but it had like definitely had some raised quality that seemed like really past the 12 EDO minor third. But I didn't exactly catch the contrasts you were making with it and 7/6. Like, in my mind, that's not the reason why it sounded like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. But, like, that high part of the melody goes, da, 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 where, like, some reason the C sharp it sounds really wide compared to the D. And that, like, tricked my ear into thinking that the minor third was high, but it doesn't make any sense. How'd you do that?
You're absolutely right. It's like it's kind of an illusion. I think what's going on there is quite funny. And I'll show you the melody. When you see it written out, it kind of makes sense. Because basically, because the sharp 4 and the 4 are both really flat. So when it lands on the third, it kind of sounds like it's sharp.
Huh. Yes.
So the sharp 4, we're talking about it being 25/18, right? So it's about 30 cents flat. And then the 4 is a 21/16, so that's also about 30 cents flat.
Yes.
So it kind of tricks your ear into hearing things in a different place.
Huh. There must be some sort of conflict between the direction I would like things to go if it was stretching downwards and something you've done in the harmony or the intonation to make it go upwards. That's very zen of you, yes.
Let's have a look at this first section, see if we can figure out what's going on, because it's been a while since I looked at it. Let's hopefully...
Absolutely.
Let me share the screen.
Sweet. Excited to dive in.
Okay, so here's the sax part with the chords. I'll take off the transposing for a minute. Maybe it's easier if we talk about it transposed, actually, because then we've got all the chords written transposed. So we're in E minor now, right?
Yeah.
And so the first note of the melody, of course, is E, ba, ba, D, tempered, right? So we're on an E minor chord, and the E minor chord has a 7/6, right? So it's a sub minor chord. And then the bass note moves down to D, but we're still on an E minor chord. So, of course, I wanted to use a pure D, so I used 7/6 as our D. So the bass is going ba, ba, and then next the bass moves down to C sharp. And so I thought, okay, well, how can I tune this chord purely? And so this is what I went for. I went for having the root, i.e. F sharp, is a 10/9.
Ah!
Okay, and so bear in mind that this is basically chord 2. So I'm putting it on a 10/9 in order that we have the third as being pure, the fifth as being pure, and then we have the seventh also pure, right? So the seventh in this instance is our E minus 49, right? This is our 25/18 that we looked at, well, sorry, 35/18 that we looked at a moment ago, right? And then the next chord is chord 5, it's B7. And so, of course, the root is 3/2, so B plus 2. And I've tuned it purely, so it's 5/4 and 3/2, and of course a 7/4. And so the 7/4 is our melody note also. So that's a 21/16, right?
Yeah.
The 7/4 of the 3/2 is our 21/16. So this melody then, ba, ba, then kind of moves into a different dimension, because now these two notes are both about the same amount flat, right? They're both about 30 cents flat of our tempered kind of framework. But then when we land on G, our G is 33 cents flat. So again, we're still in the kind of same amount flat. And then when the G sharpens to 6/5, for me that's quite a dramatic change. And what's going on there is that this E minor chord we're back to where we started. It's a sub minor chord, and the next chord in the progression is C7. Okay, so it's going from E minor to C7, and I wanted to keep the E in that C7 chord to be the same E as in our E minor chord, right? I didn't want to have a comma there. I wanted that to be shared. And in order for us to have a C7 chord that's pure, and for the E to be the same E as we've just had, this is how it ends up being tuned. So we've got C plus 14, G plus 16. So B flat comes out as being minus 17. And the key thing is here, the G, right? In order for this C7 to be pure, and for the E to be the same E, G must change. Right, so something's got to give. And in this instance, it's the G that changes. So our minor third goes from being a sub minor third of G minor 33, right, a 7/6 ratio, up to being a 6/5 ratio. So if we just go back to our list of ratios for a moment, what we find is that, in other words, the root of that chord is an 8/5, right? So it's the 5 limit minor sixth, and it's we're just building a pure dominant seventh chord on 8/5. That makes sense?
Yes, it totally does. And there's that contrast between 7/6 and 6/5 in the melody. I think maybe the 6/5 sounds really high to me because the 7/6 is not only really far away from the 6/5, but also because, like, in a bluesy context where people use the sub minor third in this sort of way, it's kind of common for them to stick to the 7/6. So to have the 7/6 and then have the 6/5 is like this added colorful interest in that role that I don't think is normally there, but is really just awesomely colorful.
Yeah, for me, I just feel like I'm kind of being transported to a different world, or my head's being tilted in a different angle, and that's one of the most fun things about microtonality is that it kind of hits you in the face.
Yeah.
And it kind of sneaks up on you because, I say, it's the same note. It's still a G. It's still the minor third of this piece, but it's coloured in a different way. And so this chord progression here from E minor to C7, this is, like, in my mind, the main feature of the arrangement. And in the version we did with Philipp, we kind of set up a vamp, and that vamp just goes between these two chords, just to kind of emphasize it a bit and play around with that, and give Philipp a chance to kind of improvise around that progression. And yeah, so this all comes out of just following this descending bass line that Nelson Riddle wrote in his arrangement, and just trying to tune it in a way that I found to be pleasing. What's happening in the bridge is, again, I'm talking about in transposed pitch now. So we're doing a 2-5-1 into B major.
Yeah.
Okay, and the comma is between D sharp that we have as the ninth of the C sharp minor 9 chord, and the D sharp that we have as the third of the B major 7 chord. You can see here that that D sharp is a D sharp plus 56 when it's the minor ninth of our C sharp, and it's plus 15 when it's the major third of B. So again, it's about a quarter tone different. I think again I find that really exciting and joyful and pleasing when that second D sharp hits you, and you're just like, it's like your chair's been pulled from under you or something like that. I might just play it one more time while now we're looking at it. Right?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So
let's think about it in relation to the 13/8. So let's pretend for a minute the fundamental of this tuning is the 13/8, which in this instance is somewhere between C and C sharp.
Excellent.
Right?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So in which case, we've got this C sharp minor ninth chord, and essentially it's about a quarter tone sharp, right? Because this C sharp is. I'm thinking of the 13/8 as being a C. So let me call that 13/8 a C for a moment.
Sure.
I want the C sharp to be a semitone above that C, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the C is already about a quarter tone sharp. And so the C sharp has got to be a quarter tone sharp as well. And so if we look at the list of pitches, what we'll find is that, if I just transpose that, so yeah, so we've got a C sharp as being 16/15, right, which is our ordinary pure semitone. But of course, when you put a 16/15 on top of the 13/8, then it's with reference to the fundamental, we're actually now a quarter tone sharp on the C sharp as well. So that's how we end up with a C sharp minor ninth chord. And if you tune that C sharp minor ninth chord purely, which is what I've done here, this D sharp is just the 9/8 of the C sharp. Okay, and so the 9/8 of the C sharp gives us a D sharp of plus 56. Okay, so this sounds like an ordinary minor ninth chord, ordinary pure minor ninth chord. And so when it gets funky is then when we want to do that 2-5-1 and we land on B. And B, of course, I'm taking kind of the pure option here, I think. So I'm taking the B as being, I think it's the 15/8 of the C. Yeah, exactly. It's the 15/8. So again, I'm just doing the most logical thing, right? My fundamental is a C, and I want a B. So naturally, I'm just going to do the most obvious pure interval, which is our 15/8. But of course, the 15/8 is being a 5-limit interval, much like the 5/4. It's a bit flat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so having that being a bit flat, and then we're going to put a major third on it, and of course that major third is also a bit flat compared to a tempered third. Then this is where this comma comes from, because this D sharp is a 5/4 relative to this B, and this B is a 15/8 relative to the C. And so those two gaps of about 15 cents add up, right? And so now we have a gap of about 30 cents relative to the D sharp we had a moment ago.
Can you state the intervallic relationship again that causes the discrepancies between the two written D sharps that you see to stack? Because I don't think I quite understood it, but I think I can if you repeat it again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's I'm doing it not explaining it clearly because it's quite new to me as well. It's been a long time since I looked at it. So the C sharp is a 16/15 of our root C.
Yes.
And I've built a pure minor ninth chord on top of that C sharp, which means that the D sharp is a 9/8 of C sharp.
Okay.
And so when we do that 9/8 on top of that 16/15, then the D sharp we get is a 6/5. The D sharp we get. Yeah, I was right.
I think I've got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you,
It's like 6/5.
yeah,
right?
yeah. So you're so basically you're saying the D sharp that's on top of C sharp minor is a 16/15 times a 9/8, right? Like a major second above that. And then the D sharp that's over the B chord is a 5/4 above 15/8.
Exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly
Okay.
right. I'm thinking about C as being 1/1. And so C sharp is 16/15. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. That means that D sharp, being a pure tone above that, C sharp comes out as being 6/5 relative to C. Whereas when we put a 5/4 on top of a 15/8, we get a much more complicated interval of 75/64. Right? That second D sharp we hear there is 75/64 because it's a 5/4 on top of a 15/8. Right? Because the root of that chord is a B, and again, in order to tune that B chord purely, I thought, okay, well, my fundamental is C. I want a B, so I'm just going to do the most obvious fundamental of a B. The most obvious interval to get a B out of a C, and that's the 15/8. But then you stack on top of that 15/8 the 5/4, and then we get this D sharp that's a lot flatter than the D sharp we had a moment ago.
That's such a great example of a simple contrast you can get between notes where there's a lot of math to be done, but if you think of it as terms of smaller relative intervals, it totally makes sense.
That's exactly right. And, when I was coming up with this, I was not thinking complicated. I was not doing anything clever. I was really just trying to find the most simple way of tuning, the most simple and logical way of tuning the chords and the chord progression. So I've got the chord progression in front of me. I'm just thinking, okay, right, well, this is a tempered chord progression, but how could I realize that tempered chord progression in just intonation? And, at that point in time, that was about 3 years ago, my knowledge of JI intervals was not that great, so I was thinking of the lowest partials I could use to create a GI chord out of each of these chords that are in front of me on this chord progression. And it happens that when you do that, you get some pretty weird stuff coming out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for diving in for us. We really appreciate it here on the podcast. Is there another piece you would like to get into the charts of? We don't have to, but I think it could be fun if you wanted to.
I would like to show you something where I've used microtonality as a textural device, because that's kind of the opposite approach to what I'm doing here. This is obviously very much focused on the exact pitches, but lately I've kind of got interested in using microtonality in a much more blurry, abstract way, and I'd like to show you that and maybe listen to a little bit of that, because
yes,
I feel like that's where I'm going now. This is a piece where I wanted to basically take what I've learnt from studying some Ligeti music and try to apply that. And essentially the main parameter that's being manipulated is the register. I'm starting from a certain place in the register, and it basically gets lower and lower and lower
I see.
throughout the piece.
Yeah.
But there isn't really a melody in this piece, and there are three parts. There's a cello part, an alto sax part, and a guitar part. And I later rewrote that to play with a keyboard player. But the idea of it remains the same, which is that it's supposed to just be this blurry texture where you can't really hear any particular things going on. It's just like a misty cloud that is covering you. And so here, I've written it with tempered quarter tones, and I played it on my tempered quarter tone guitar, my 24 EDO guitar. But that's kind of almost irrelevant, really. It's just about having each of these phrases spans a distance of a neutral third.
Ah.
Right? So essentially what we've got here is a very kind of chromatic sounding phrase where it goes around, up and down all these notes, but it's only spanning a neutral third. And then we move to the next phrase, and again, that next phrase still spans a neutral third, but it just spans a neutral third lower down. And then we go to the next phrase, and it's still spanning a neutral third, but it's just spanning a neutral third lower down again.
Yeah.
So it's all about register. I played this with a synth player, and well, I'll play you a bit of it, and you can tell me what you think.
Yeah. Wonderful piece so far. I'm really loving the story arc of it. You have kind of like those these clusters. They move to different places, and I don't know if you're thinking about the like how long it takes to move to the next one in terms of register.
No.
Are you making that like sort of a fixed amount of time to move to each one, sort of like a 2 measures in the guitar part, or are you making that happen at different times? It seems roughly around the same, but although I can't really tell.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we just improvised when we moved from one to another, and my
Okay.
idea for that performance was let's just see what it feels like and move when we feel like moving. I think I would like to try a version of this piece where I do write it out exactly and specify the length, because I would like to just try my hand at can I come up with like what for me it feels like the ideal length of each section. But no, in this instance we really just played it by ear.
Yeah, and so then I guess in that first section, then you've also got. I want to say you told me what the instruments were, and I may have misheard them. Is there like a piano that's holding out, and then is that how you get the sound at the end of the A section where the dynamics grow and all the microtones are being held? So there's almost like sort of a. There's almost sort of like a vocal quality to it where there's just huge amounts of shimmer instead of individual tones microtonally clustered around.
What you're hearing there is synth master Gabriel Zucker. He was playing there a Dave Smith Prophet X synth, and I was playing my quarter-tone guitar. And Gabriel is very, very good at controlling his Prophet X synth, and he's using there at some points, I think he's using the delay effect or the loop effect, and speeding up and slowing down that loop. So he's taken a little loop of the written material, and then he's manipulating it, and at one point he uses it super, super fast. So you've got this absolutely flood of notes coming at you. And that, for me, is exactly what I wanted, because when it's that fast, you, of course, have no sense of what any of these notes are. You just get this flurry, and it's just a textural effect. I wish I could learn to play that on the guitar. Maybe there's a way I can learn to do that on the guitar. But, yeah, that's all down to his mastery with the Prophet X.
Yeah, with the right delays and everything, it seems like you could do that. It's great that you have that transitional moment, too, because it's pretty rare that I hear pieces that have this sort of microtonal cluster texture that then transition into that. So I think that's really special, and it also, it hits a lot harder than, like, just having him arpeggiate through the notes really fast and hold them. I think there's something better about it. In what kind of rhythm are you employing in the first part? Is it kind of like 3-on-2 stuff? Is it completely improvised? I thought I was detecting some kind of triplet thing, but I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, it's funny, because my hope was to try to make it as blurry as possible, and try to play as kind of arrhythmically as I could, but it's really hard,
It is, yeah.
When you're playing with someone else, your instinct as a musician is to play with them and to do something that relates to their rhythm, and so there are moments where it locks together, and actually that's not quite what I intended, but I think it's fine, I think it's nice to have these bits where it's completely impossible to tell any rhythms, and other bits maybe where it locks together a bit more. I don't mind that. But, I've written the sheet music to just be all in quavers, but that's the sole purpose of that is to tell me what the pitches are. The music, the sheet music is not telling me at all how long they are. And so I was trying to play it by ear as to what felt good, and trying to play with the resonances between the two instruments, because particularly in that final section where it's very, very slow, I can hear what notes Gabriel's playing, and I can strike my note against that. And if I like that resonance, maybe I'll hold my note longer and let it resonate with Gabriel's note. But maybe if I don't like that one, I can change the next one. At that point, our registers are very, very close together. So there are points where I'm playing a note that's 1/4 tone away from the note he's playing. So you get that lovely beating, really aggressive beating.
Yeah.
And I in the moment, I really enjoyed leaning into that and trying to get it to beat as hard as I could. There's a section actually where maybe I went too hard on that, and it became too obvious, too heavy-handed. But the way that beating makes your body vibrate is really incredible. Performing in quite a small space, and it just felt so good in the moment. I just wanted to keep playing that note and hear it grate against Gabriel's note.
Wonderful. I couldn't agree more. Would you want to show me the rest of the piece, or?
Yes. Let's go from the kind of what in my mind is like the C section, that's like the quiet bit.
And then would the B section be the section where Gabriel is looping his synth?
Yeah, so for me, like in my mind, the B section is where both of us are playing in the kind of mid register, and that's exactly where Gabriel was using his looper. And then the C section is like we're both in the low register, and the A is kind of we're mostly both in the kind of higher register. But I think this piece could pan out in many ways. This is how it happened to pan out this time. So the C section we're about to hear, we're both low register and we're overlapping quite a lot.
So that ending there, the low beating, that's the synth, I'm guessing, right? Because it's so precise.
Yeah, he's holding holding a quartet step interval.
Yeah.
And yeah, that resonance is amazing, I think.
Oh, that's so cool. I love those overlapping lines you have in the C section. I'm hearing a lot of sub-fourths and some neutral seconds, and then you get to the quarter tone, like, beating between a note and then another note, a quarter tone apart, and that's kind of like the zenith of it.
Yeah. Well, it's fun because, I know what notes he's got in total, but I don't know which one he's going to play when. And so... You know what I mean? So when I play my note, I don't know if the note he's going to play next is going to be a minor third away, or a tone away, or 3/4 tones away. And so that's kind of the fun of that section, is we both get to really respond to each other, because it's the only section in the piece that's slow enough that we can really respond to each other.
Yeah.
And as you can hear, there are bits where we've got ordinary tempered intervals happening, in minor thirds in particular you hear quite a bit of. But, then the next moment you've got a quarter tone interval, the next, it's all, you don't know what's going to happen next. And that's exactly the type of feeling I was trying to create, where it's like it has no clear direction. It's quite meandering in a way.
It reminds me of some chant music where it sort of hangs around a certain pitch collection, and the way the way the phrase gets you to certain pitches tells you what the main pitches might be. Very clear macro harmony, I think, in that first section, where there's a collection of pitches that's being used, and you can hear what it is.
Yeah, well, in the first kind of 2/3 of the piece, you can't really ever pick out a specific interval because it's all so fleeting, it's all so fast.
Yeah.
And that was very much the idea. Whereas in this final section of the piece, and lots of credit goes to Gabriel here for kind of encouraging this slow section, that's where you can actually begin to hear intervals. The musical material is very much still the same. It's just the tempo we're playing at that changes.
So there's not like a wider swing in intervallic range in that later section than before?
If I show you, here you can see C, and the interval between the lowest note in this section and the highest note in this section in each individual part is still a neutral third. Right, so here we're looking at E flat to yeah, there it is, G half, G quarter tone flat.
It almost makes me think that the way you played with the tempo affected how I perceived the range as a listener. Like, if all the notes are moving fast, the rhythm isn't as united with each other, and they're playing a band of clusters, you have that band, and you might think of it as like your central location, but then if you're slowing down, you get to hear those distances, and they seem larger, because there's more time spent on them.
Yeah, maybe you're right, yeah. And I think also it's to do with, the relationship with the other part, because at that point we're both playing in quite a similar register, but it's not quite the same. It's overlapping, but if you sum the register of those two parts together, of course, you get a wider interval than neutral third. I don't remember exactly what register Gabriel's playing in, but I think maybe it's a touch higher than the neutral third I'm on. Let's say, for example, it might be a neutral third between F and F quarter tone flat. And so, in total, of course, we've got a wider interval than neutral third. We've got E flat to A quarter tone flat. So we've almost got a perfect fifth.
Well, that's neat. Well, thanks so much for
Perfect
showing me that great deep dive.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Really nice to speak to you, Steve.
Yeah, of course. I think I'm basically out of time over here, but yeah, hopefully we did a good job delving into some of your work. Is there anything you want to plug at the end, or any last things you'd like to get to?
No, well, honestly, the only thing I should say is that the last few days I've been working with the Orchestra of Future Intoners, playing the instruments or the recreations of Luigi Rusolo's instruments, the great Italian futurist Luigi Rusolo. And we are playing at Wigmore Hall tomorrow as part of the London Contemporary Music Festival. I think at some point it's going to be broadcast on Radio 3, BBC Radio 3. It won't be broadcast live, unfortunately, but at some point the recording of these crazy, noisy, gargly, scratchy instruments is going to be available on the internet, so I will let you know when that is the case.
I read the article you sent me about them. I knew about futurism, but I had forgotten about these instruments. I don't think I've thought about them for maybe 10 years, and it's so great that people are still interested in them. I think the theatricality of it and the novelty of the instruments, their largeness, their unusualness, very much reminds me of like a Harry Partch or a Craig Grady situation.
Right. Yeah, but it's so much earlier than that. In 1913 they were first built, and I don't think I'd heard of Rusolo at all, to be honest, before I was part of this project. But it's very refreshing and very fun. I think maybe the theatrical element of it is partly why it's been quite popular. The concert sold out weeks ago.
Wow.
And I've been to a lot of concerts with weird instruments making weird noise, and they usually do not sell out, right? But I think because these, as I say, there's a certain novelty to them. It's attracted quite a bit of attention. We've got this article in the Guardian, and yeah, it's very exciting. I'm really looking forward to performing tonight.
That's so wonderful. Well, I hope it's a great time, and I will see you later then.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Stephen. Bye for now.
Yeah, of course. Adios. The music you're hearing is a microtonal rendition of Night and Day, covered by Philipp Gerschlauer and Julian Woods. If you enjoy what you hear, you can leave a review on iTunes and spread the word. Thanks to all our supporters on Patreon, our Zen Harmonic patrons, as well as our Zen Harmonic gods: Jundai Bates Kobashigawa, Naren Rattan, Mike Battaglia, Adam Freese, Matthew Sheeran, Hector McGuffin, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Joe Weigel, and Teen Harmon Cartel. Remember, if you're not already doing so, you can support the podcast on Patreon. The lowest tier is only at $5 a month, and you get to support a great cause, promoting microtonal music in all its delightful forms. Link is in the description. You also get access to behind-the-scenes information on many of my Microtonal projects, such as transcriptions, covers, or other surprises. A little bit goes a long way. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time on Now and Zen.